The first note arrived on a Tuesday, and the Duke of Harrowmere did not read it. He recognized the hand at once. Of course, the round, careful lettering, the way the M in his name curved a little too generously, as though whoever had written it had learned to write on old ledger paper and had never quite forgiven the habit. He recognized the folding, too. 3 neat creases. A woman who had folded a great many letters in her life, most of them for other people. He set it on the corner of the walnut desk, in his rooms at Grosvenor Street beneath a paperweight of green marble, and did not open it. He did not open the second, which arrived on the Friday, or the third, which came the following Wednesday. By the end of the month, there were 9 of them, stacked like a small, quiet library, beside the paperweight. And Alexander Vane, 6th Duke of Harrowmere, master of an estate he had not visited in 14 months, had convinced himself he knew what they said. She was pleading. Of course she was pleading. Women in her position always pleaded. More candles, more coal, a doctor for the child, a governess who spoke French, permission to order a new gown for the eldest, an increase in the household budget because the price of tea had risen again and the tenants had been slow with their rents. He had married her precisely so that he need not concern himself with any of this. He had left her the keys to Harrowmere Hall and its 400 rooms and its 2 motherless children. And in return he had been permitted to remain here, in London, in the club and the courts and the whist rooms and the fog, where feeling did not reach him. He was a man who had inherited more debts of grief than of money, and had discharged both badly. This is a story about how he came to know it. But we are ahead of ourselves. Let us go back, for you must understand how Rosamund Ashford came to be signing her name in the ledgers of Harrowmere Hall in the first place, and why the man who married her had not looked at her face on the day of the wedding. She had been, when he found her, a large woman of 29 in a stone-cold pew of a village church in the parish of Marwood-under-Fen, singing the responses in a low, careful contralto, because her father, the vicar, had died on the Michaelmas before, and there was no curate willing to take up the parsonage until spring. She had been keeping the church books and the parish accounts and the coal cellar and her invalid aunt's medicines, and on Sundays the responses themselves, standing at the front pew in a black gown let out twice at the seams and refusing to weep where anyone might see. The village had a great deal to say about the size of Miss Ashford. Marwood was not a kind place. The size of Miss Ashford had been a topic since she was 15, when her mother had died and her father had folded into grief like a book pressed shut, and Rosamund had taken over the running of the parsonage and had grown into her mother's body, and her mother's calm, and unfortunately for the ton, her mother's face, which had been called handsome by people who liked her, and plain by people who did not. The village had said more or less audibly for 14 years that no man of standing would look twice at a woman of her size. Rosamund had trained the words not to land visibly. She had not trained them not to land. No man of standing looks twice at a woman of her size. It sat in her, that sentence, the way a coin sits in a pocket, noticed only when she moved. Alexander Vane came to Marwood in November because a horse had gone lame beneath him on the North Road, and because he was running from London the way other men run to it. He was 33, a widower of 18 months, and he had 2 children at his estate in the north, whom he had not seen since the funeral. He had told himself he was going home. He had not been going home. He had been going anywhere that was not the room in which his wife had died. He put up at the Marwood Inn because the horse could go no further, and on the Sunday morning because the innkeeper's wife said the vicarage was in a poor way, and it was Christian to attend. He sat in the 3rd pew of St. Anselm's, and heard a woman sing the response. He noticed, first, that she was singing because no one else would. He noticed, second, that the parish clerk was drunk. He noticed, third, that the 2 small girls in the pew ahead of him, The ironmongers, he later learned, were being quietly kept from tumbling into the aisle by the woman in the front pew, who caught the smaller one by the sash, without turning around and without missing a syllable of the hymn. He noticed, fourth, her he would remember afterwards that he had not, in that moment, thought of her as beautiful, or as plain, or as anything else that men are trained to think of. Women. He had thought only, she is keeping this room upright. And then, unbidden and unwelcomely, my house has been falling for 18 months, and no one has done that for me. He was a man who noticed. It was the trait his late wife had loved him for, and his father had beaten him for, and his tenants had trusted him for, and his London friends had never quite forgiven him for. He noticed the servant with the swollen ankle. He noticed the laughter, pitched a shade too loud. He noticed, over 3 days at the Marwood Inn, that Miss Ashford of the vicarage was owed 6 months back stipend from the diocese. That her aunt was dying by inches upstairs, that she had refused 3 offers of charity from the squire's wife with a grace that suggested she had refused a great many more, and that she was the only person in Marwood whom the children of the parish approached without hesitation. On the 4th day, he called at the vicarage. He introduced himself by his rank, because he had learned that not doing so wasted time. He was shown into a parlor that had been aired despite the cold, and he was offered tea he suspected had been steeped twice, and across from him sat a large woman in a plain gray gown, with ink on the second finger of her right hand. "I have 2 children," he said. He had rehearsed nothing. He was surprised to find that he had begun. A boy of 9, a girl of 6. Their mother died in the summer before last. The girl has not spoken since. He paused. Rosamond Ashford watched him with a steadiness he found he could not name. "The boy speaks a great deal but says nothing. I have engaged 4 governesses. None has stayed above a fortnight. My aunt writes to me that the house is failing. I need a wife by Christmas, Miss Ashford. I need someone who will not run. I do not require love and I cannot offer it. I am told that you are a woman of unusual competence and that you have no one left to keep you here." She did not flinch. He remembered that afterwards. That she did not flinch, and did not color, and did not cast down her eyes, and did not perform anything at all. She simply set down her cup. "Your Grace," she said, "before I answer anything, you will tell me the truth, all of it. I do not bargain with half a story." He had not expected that. He had expected gratitude, or refusal, or the small performed dignity of a woman deciding whether to seem eager. He had not expected to be asked, plainly, for the truth. He gave her, in 20 minutes, and with a directness that startled him more than it startled her, everything: the wife who had died of a fever, the physicians had called kind, and which had not been, the boy who had begun waking screaming and had stopped, the girl who had sung at her mother's bedside on the last afternoon because her mother had asked her to, and who had not sung or spoken since, the aunt at Harrowmere who wrote him letters he did not answer, the trustees who had begun to make noises about the guardianship of the children if he did not, as they phrased it, put his house in order. "And you," she said when he had finished, "what has failed in you, Your Grace, that you cannot go home to your own children?" He stared at her. "You have 400 rooms," she said, not unkindly. "You have not needed a wife. You have needed to be a father. I would like to know why you cannot be." He answered her, which surprised him. He said, "Because she died in the Blue Room, and I have not been able to enter it, and if I go home, I will have to enter it, and if I enter it, I do not know what I will do." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I will marry you, Your Grace. But I will name my terms." He inclined his head. "I will have full authority in the nursery. Your aunt and your steward and your London solicitors may write me what they like. The children answer to me, and I answer to you, and to no one else. You will not undermine me in front of the household." The late Duchess's things will not be moved, or sold, or shrouded. Her portrait stays where it hangs. The girl will not be told, ever, by anyone, that she is being given a new mother. I am not her mother. I do not seek to be. And you will come home for Christmas, and for Easter, and for the boy's birthday, whether you can bear the blue room or not. Those are my conditions. They are, he said, extraordinary. They are the minimum, she said, at which I can be of any use to you. Something in him, later he would not be able to name what, shifted. She saw it shift, she saw it the way one sees a candle catch, and she looked away. Because she did not want him to know she had seen. Agreed, he said. They were married on the second Tuesday of December, in the same church in which he had first seen her, with the drunken clerk absent and a curate borrowed from 3 villages over, and Rosamond Ashford became Rosamond Vane, Duchess of Harrowmere, in a dove-grey gown that had been her mother's and taken out again at the seams. The Duke did not look at her face during the ceremony. He looked at the altar rail, and at the hymnal, and at the vicar's shoes. Afterwards he told himself he had been overwhelmed. In truth, he had been afraid. Afraid that if he looked at her he would begin to feel something, and he had promised himself, on the afternoon his wife had died, that he would not feel anything again, for as long as he could arrange it. He escorted her to Harrowmere Hall the following morning. He introduced her to his Aunt Lavinia, who received her with a coldness so precise it could have cut glass, and to the housekeeper, Mrs. Grimsby, who received her with a wariness that was almost fair, and to the children, who did not receive her at all. The boy, Theodore, made a bow of scrupulous rudeness and left the room. The girl, Cecily, 6 years old, and dark-eyed and thin-shouldered, looked at her once, silently, and turned her face into the wall. He stayed 2 nights. On the 3rd morning, he called for his carriage and returned to London. He did not, on his way out, meet his new wife's eyes. He told himself he had discharged his duty. He told himself the house was now in her hands. He told himself he would come home for Christmas. He did not come home for Christmas. He sent a note. Business detained him. The trustees required his attention. He would come for Twelfth Night. He did not come for Twelfth Night. He would come for Candlemas. He did not come for Candlemas. And this is where the letters begin. The first in that round, careful hand arrived on a Tuesday in January. He set it beneath the paperweight without opening it. She was pleading, he thought. He had left her a great deal to manage, and now she was writing to plead for more of it, and he did not want to know what she needed, because knowing what she needed would require him to go home. The second arrived on the Friday. The third on the following Wednesday. By March there were 14 of them. He had not opened any. He was, you must understand, not a stupid man. He was not even, in the whole reckoning, a cruel one. He was a man who had been trained by a cold father, and then unmade by a warm wife. And when the warm wife had died, he had reached for the only shape he knew, which was his father's, and he had held it around himself like a coat that did not fit. Men do not always care to be seen. Alexander Vane, in the winter of his widowerhood, did not care to be seen most of all by a woman he had married in cold blood. He would remember later that in April his Aunt Lavinia wrote to him from Harrowmere in tones of poisoned pity. The new Duchess, she said, was making herself absurd. She was in the nursery at all hours. She had dismissed 2 footmen for cruelty to the girl. She had taken the boy's Latin tutor to task in front of the household. She had opened the curtains in the blue room. She was, said Aunt Lavinia, behaving like a woman who imagined herself loved, and it would be a kindness to correct her. Alexander did not answer that letter either. But he took it out of its envelope, which was more than he had done for his wife's. You may ask why. It is the question this story must answer, And there is only one honest answer, and it is that he was afraid. Afraid of a house that had begun from the corner of every letter he did not open, to sound as though it were becoming warm without him. And warm was a thing he had promised himself he would not feel. It was in May that the first thing changed. A letter came that was not in her hand, it was in a child's hand. Round and careful, too, but larger, the letters wobbling. It said, in 6 words, "Papa, please come home for Cecily's birthday." It was signed Theodore. He opened that one. He read it twice. He put it down. He picked it up. He rang for his valet and told him to pack a trunk for a fortnight in the country. And then, an hour later, he rang again and told him to unpack it. He wrote a letter that said he could not come, that business detained him, that he would send the girl a pony. He tore it up. He wrote another that said he would come. He tore that up too. He did not go. He sent the pony. 2 weeks later, there was another child's letter, and this one was shorter still. "Papa, please. Theodore." He did not go. He wrote nothing. He put the letter beneath the paperweight with the others, and the letters in her hand kept coming. Every Tuesday and every Friday, without fail, like a clock. He did not open them. He had begun, by then, to be a little afraid of them, of what he had let them become. It was in October, 11 months after the wedding, that the last letter arrived. It was thicker than the others. The paper was heavier. The direction was written in the same round hand, but the M in his name did not curve at all this time. It was straight and small, and it looked, he thought when he saw it, like a door closed. He almost did not open that one either. But something in the straightness of the M stopped him. He slid his letter knife under the seal. It said, "Your Grace, I have written you 41 letters over the course of this year. I did not expect you to answer them all. I did not expect you to answer most. I expected you to answer one. You did not. I do not write now to ask anything of you. I write to inform you that on the 14th of this month, I shall be leaving Harrowmere Hall. I have arranged everything. And C. Cor. War. S. Miss Verity Fenmore, who was until last spring governess to Lady Whitlock's children, and comes with the highest character, has agreed to accept the position of governess to Theodore and Cecily, and will be established here before I go. Mrs. Grimsby has the accounts in order to a farthing. You will find them on the library desk. The children have been told nothing, yet I will tell them the day before I leave, so that they may say goodbye if they wish, and so that they may not, if they do not. I do not go in anger. I go because I have understood at last that you did not marry me to make a home. You married me to make a shape. I have made the shape. It is done. It will hold without me now. Sayer, I have loved your son and your daughter in a way I did not know I was capable of loving anyone. I have also, and it is fair that you should know this, come to love you, which was neither in the contract nor in my expectations, and which I mention only so that you may understand that I go not because I feel nothing, but because I feel too much, and there is no dignity left in staying to feel it alone. I wish you every happiness. Rosamond Vane. He read it, and then he read it again, and then he sat very still for a long time in a room that had grown, without his noticing, quite dark. He turned to the stack of unopened letters beneath the paperweight. There were, as she had said, 40 of them, plus the one in his hand. He opened the first, dated the 12th of January. It said, "Your Grace, I write to tell you that Cecily spoke this morning. She said the word cold. It was the fire which had gone out in the nursery, and she said it looking at the grate. It was one word. I only laid another log and said, 'Yes, it is.' She looked at me. and I thought she might say another. She did not. But she said one, and I thought you should know. Your obedient servant, Rosamond Vane. He opened the second. Your Grace, Cecily has said 3 more words in the last week. Cold, again. Bread. No. A child who says no is a child who has come partway back into the world. R.V. He opened the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 10th, 20th. They were not pleas. They had never been pleas. They were dispatches, brief, patient, undramatic dispatches from a war being quietly won in his absence by a woman who had asked nothing of him but that he should know it was being won. Cecily had begun in February to hum. In March she had spoken a whole sentence, and the sentence had been, "Please, may I have a book about horses?" In April she had asked Rosamond why nobody sang the hymn her mother had sung, and Rosamond had answered that anybody who wished to sing it might, and Cecily had asked whether she might. Rosamond had said yes. Cecily had not sung it. Not yet. But she had asked. Theodore had begun to sleep through the night in March. He had begun to bring Rosamond his books in April, small, hard fossils of grief he had been carrying alone. He had told Rosamond, in May, that he had been afraid he had killed his mother by asking her to sit up when she was tired, and Rosamond had said, plainly and without hedging, "You did not kill your mother. Your mother was already dying. She sat up because she wished to see you. That is a different thing." Theodore had wept, Rosamond wrote, for a long time, and afterwards had eaten his supper. There were letters about the tenants, the Fenmore Cottage roof, which she had had repaired, without waiting for London approval, because a woman was confined there, the widow Marwood's coal, which she had arranged, the schoolhouse in the village, which she had begun to teach in 3 mornings a week, because the master had left, and no replacement had been sent. There were letters about the accounts, which she had audited and found to be £400 a year in leak, and about the leak which she had traced to a steward and which she had, quietly, with the aid of a country solicitor, stopped. She had recovered, she noted without emphasis, some £1,700 of misappropriated rents in the last 4 months. There were letters about the Blue Room. She had entered it in February. She wrote him this plainly, as one writes a fact, and had aired it. She had not moved anything. She had opened the curtains in the mornings, and closed them at night. She had thought he should know because he had said, in the parlor at Marwood, that he could not enter it. And it seemed to her that a room which had been shut too long began, after a while, to make its own grief, and she had not wanted his wife's room to make more grief than his wife's death had already made. The Duchess's portrait had been dusted. The hymnal by the pianoforte was open, as it had been left. Rosamond had not touched it. And in July, he read this one twice, and then a 3rd time. Cecily had at last sung. She had sung the hymn her mother had sung. She had sung it in the nursery while Rosamond was mending a stocking, and she had sung it without being asked and without stopping. When Rosamond looked up, and Rosamond had gone on mending the stocking, and had not, she wrote, wept until the child had left the room. There is not much to tell about the state of your Grace's servant. Rosamond had written at the end of that letter, "I am well. I am tired. The house is warm. Your daughter sings." He put the letter down. He put his face in his hands, and Alexander Vane, 6th Duke of Harrowmere, who had not wept since the afternoon his wife had died, wept for the better part of an hour into the walnut desk in his rooms at Grosvenor Street, in a room that had grown very dark and in which nobody could see him. Men do not always care to be seen. Sometimes it is the last thing a man learns. That being unseen is a country you can starve in. He called for the carriage that night. The valet asked whether he ought to pack for a fortnight. Alexander said, pack for the rest of my life. The road to Harrowmere was 2 days in fair weather and 3 in October. He took it in 2. He did not sleep at the inn at Rothbury. He changed horses and went on. He arrived at Harrowmere Hall on the evening of the 13th, 1 day before she was to leave. He did not know, until he was standing in the drive with the carriage lamps yellow behind him, what he had come to say. Work. He had rehearsed nothing. He had spent 2 days rehearsing nothing. He had, in fact, been afraid that if he rehearsed, he would come up with the wrong words and would then be unable to unlearn them. The great door was opened by Mrs. Grimsby, who looked at him without surprise, and with something that was not quite reproach and not quite pity, but was firmly not welcome. "Your Grace," she said, "the Duchess is in the library." "Ha? Does she know I have come?" "She does now, Your Grace." She heard the carriage. He climbed the great stairs and crossed the long gallery. And every window along it, he noticed, was uncovered. Every curtain had been drawn back. Ha! The house, which had been dim as a cellar for 14 months when he had left it, was full of the last of the evening light coming in low and gold across the boards. Someone had polished the boards. Someone had polished, he saw, the brasses of the doors as well. The library door was open. She was standing at the desk, not sitting. She had a shawl about her shoulders, and a stack of papers in her hand, and she was, he saw, dressed for travel. A plain, dark gown, boots, hair pinned severely. She had been going to leave in the morning. She looked up. She did not curtsy. She did not color. She said, "Your Grace Alexander," he said. It came out hoarse. "My name is Alexander. I have not permitted you to use it, and that has been one of the many cowardices of the last year. Use it, if you will." She set the papers down slowly. "Alexander," she said. She said it the way one tests a floorboard. "I have read the letters," he said. "All of them. I read them last night. I read them this morning in the carriage. I have read them, Rosamond, from the 12th of January to the 30th of September, and I have—" His voice failed. He steadied it. He said, "I thought they were pleas." She did not answer. "I thought," he said, "that you were writing to ask me for things. For money, for permissions, for authority you already had. I thought you were writing to plead. I did not read them because I could not bear to be pled with by another person. I had failed. I put them under a stone on my desk, and I told myself I knew what they said. I did not know. I did not know anything. Prass. I did not know that Cecily had spoken. I did not know that Theodore had eaten his supper. I did not know that she had sung. Rosamond. She sang." "She did," said Rosamond quietly. "I did not know," he said, "that you had gone into the blue room." She looked at him then, and her face, which had held very still, moved a little and settled. "I did not," she said, "know how not to. It made too much grief, closed. I could not open it. I know. I have not been able to enter it in nearly 2 years. I know that as well." He crossed the room. He stopped in front of the desk. He did not touch her. He said, "I do not know what a man says at this point in his life. To the woman he married in cold blood and left to hold up a house he could not bear to stand in. I do not know if there is a form of words. I have not been able to find one on the road. I have only this. I read 41 letters last night, and by the end of them I understood that I have been living, this year, in a house that has been kept warm for me by a woman who has asked me for nothing, and I understood that I have never in my life been loved so patiently, and I understood that I did not deserve it, and I understood that I wanted it more than I have wanted anything since your wife," said Rosamond. "Yes," he said. They were quiet. I read your last letter. He said you wrote that you had come to love me. I have not earned that. I know I have not earned it. I have come to say that I do not ask you to stay because you love me. I ask you to stay because... He stopped. He was... She saw struggling. She let him struggle. She had made a rule of her life, this last year, that she would not do people's difficult sentences for them. Because, he said, you were right, in the parlor at Marwood, when you asked me what had failed in me that I could not go home. I could not go home because I had made my home a place where feeling was not permitted, and I did not know how to be a person in a place where feeling was not permitted, and I did not know how to be a person anywhere else. And you went into a house that had been made unlivable by my grief, and you made it livable. You did not once write to me to tell me that you had. You wrote to me to tell me that a child said cold, and that a boy had eaten his supper, and that a woman I had loved was not to be erased. You did not write to be praised, you wrote. He shook his head. You wrote so that I should not be alone in knowing my own children. She said very quietly, I wrote so that you should not be alone. He looked at her. Then stay, he said. Not because you love me. Not tonight. I will not ask that tonight. Stay because I have not been able in 14 months to enter the room in which my wife died, and tonight I would like to enter it, and I would like... His voice broke properly this time. He did not try to steady it. Hi. Hey, steady it. Hey. I would like not to enter it by myself. She did not answer for a long moment. Then she said, yes, they went together. The blue room was on the west corridor. It had been his wife's morning room. She had died there because she had asked, at the end, to be moved from the great bedchamber to somewhere with better light. The door had a brass handle that Rosamund, he noticed, had polished. She opened it. She stood aside. He went in first, and she followed, and closed the door behind them. It was as it had been. The pianoforte still stood in the corner. The hymnal was still open on its stand. The chair by the window, in which his wife had sat for the last 3 afternoons of her life, had been dusted but not moved. The curtains, he saw this, and something in him gave, had been opened that morning and drawn again for evening, so that the room did not become a shrine, only a room. He stood in the middle of it and looked around, and did not for a long moment do anything at all. I do not know, he said, what one does. In a room like this, one stands in it, said Rosamund. Until standing in it is a thing one has done. He stood in it. She stood a little behind him, not touching him, present without pressing. After a while he said, she would have liked you. I think she would not, at first. I think she would have thought I was too plain, and too large, and too capable, and she would have watched me across a drawing-room, and decided I was dull. And then she would have talked to me, and she would have changed her mind entirely, and never mentioned that she had ever had another. I believe that of her from your letters, and from the portrait and from what Cecily has told me. She was like, he laughed. One broken laugh, half sob. Yes, he said, yes, that is exactly what she was like. I am not, said Rosamund, carefully. Her. I do not seek to be her. She was Cecily's mother. She is Cecily's mother. I have told Cecily this. I am something else. Cecily has not yet decided what. That is her right. You are her stepmother, he said. I am the woman who stayed, said Rosamund. That is enough of a name for now. He turned to her. In the light of one candle, she had lit one candle when she came in, not more. Her face was very calm and very tired, and he saw with the shock of it that she was beautiful. Not beautiful in the sense of the ton, which had never included her. Beautiful in the plain, undeniable sense in which a warm room is beautiful when one has been cold. He had not permitted himself in 11 months to notice this. He noticed it now, Rosamond, he said. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen in my life. She looked at him. She said, Alexander, do not say that if it is only gratitude. It is not gratitude, he said. I am grateful. But it is not gratitude. I am telling you a fact. I did not know it in Marwood. I did not know it at the wedding. I did not look at your face at the wedding. I was ashamed to. I did not know it in the letters, because I did not read the letters. I know it now, in this room, in this light. And I would have known it a year ago if I had let myself look, and I did not let myself look because I was afraid, and I have been afraid of a great many things, and I am done with being afraid of you. She did not answer. She did not, he saw, know how to. He said, May I take your hand? She gave him her hand. He held it, and did not attempt more, and after a moment she said, There is still tomorrow. There is still what the house will say. There is still your Aunt Lavinia, who is going to be very difficult. Yes, he said. There is still Cecily, who will need to be told what has happened, without being told anything at all, because she has not yet forgiven the world for having a mother in it who died, and she is not to be pressed. Yes, and there is still Theodore, who wrote you twice, and whom you did not answer, and to whom you owe an apology that is not a speech. Yes. There are still the tenants, and the accounts, and the schoolhouse, and the steward whose successor I have not yet named, and there is still the question of whether I will continue to have authority in this house as I have had it this year, or whether I will be undermined the moment your aunt walks into the room. You will have authority in this house, he said, as you have had it this year, and more. You will have it in front of my aunt. You will have it in front of the trustees. You will have it in front of the county. If anyone in this house or in this county behaves as though you are less than the Duchess of Harrowmere, I will make them irrelevant, quietly, and it will not be difficult. I have been irrelevant myself for a year, and I have learned the trick of it. She almost smiled at that, and in London, she said, I do not intend to go to London for some time. You will need to go eventually. I will take you with me. They will laugh at me. They will not laugh at you where I can hear it. They will not laugh at you where anyone I know can hear it. And when they laugh at you, where no one can hear it, they will discover that the joke has gone stale. Because a woman who has done what you have done in this house does not in the end remain a joke. She becomes a fact. The ton eats facts. It only chews jokes. She did smile then. Small, tired, real. Come, she said, it is late. There are 2 children in this house who will wake at 6, and the elder one has been watching the drive for you for 4 months, and will need to be told, in the morning, that you are here. He will need to be told, said Alexander, that I am staying. Are you, she said, staying? I am staying, said the Duke of Harrowmere. I do not know how to be a father, Rosamond. I have not, in truth, ever been one. I have signed papers. I have paid tuition. I have received reports. I have not been a father. I do not know how. But I have been shown, in 41 letters, how a person can be taught to come back into a house they had left. And I would like to be taught, if you will teach me. I will not teach you, said Rosamond. The children will teach you. I will only be in the room. He looked at her and he took her other hand, and he stood for a long moment, holding both her hands in a room in which he had not been able to stand for 14 months, and he said, That is more than I deserve. Yes, said Rosamond. It is. But it is what is on offer. They went out of the blue room together, and Rosamond did not close the curtains before she left, because it was already dark. And in the morning she would open them again, as she had opened them every morning since February. Some things one does not stop doing, simply because the man of the house has come home. Some things one does, because the house needs them done. She saw him to his rooms, his own rooms, along the east corridor, and she went to hers, which were not his, because there had been no discussion of that, and she was not a woman who assumed. He did not press. He had lost in a year the right to press, and he knew it. And he was, for the first time in his adult life, content to earn a thing slowly. The morning was Cecily's. She came into the breakfast room at 7:30, holding Theodore by the hand, both of them still in their nightclothes and dressing gowns, because Rosamund had said before they came down that they might. She stopped in the doorway. She saw her father. She stood very still. Theodore said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be a man's, "Good morning, Papa." Alexander stood up. He came around the table. He knelt, because Cecily was 6 and he was tall, and he was on her level then, and he said, "Good morning, Theodore. Good morning, Cecily. I have come home for good. I did not come sooner, because I was a coward, and I am sorry." Theodore's mouth trembled. He controlled it. He said, "Yes, sir, not sir," said Alexander. "Papa, if you can bear it." "Yes, Papa," said Theodore. And then he could not control it, and he cried, and Alexander held him, held his own son, in his own arms, for the first time in 18 months. And over Theodore's shoulder he watched Cecily, who was watching him. Rosamund, at the sideboard, did not move either. She had made a rule of this, too. Cecily looked at her father. She looked at her brother. She looked at Rosamund. She walked, slowly, across the room. She stopped, in front of Alexander and Theodore. She put her small hand tentatively on Theodore's back, patting it, as she had seen Rosamund do 100 times. Then she said in the small, clear voice of a child who had not used it much, "Papa, you made Mama Rosamund cry." Alexander went, very still. Rosamund at the sideboard closed her eyes for 1 second and opened them. "Cecily," she said gently, "I have not." "Yes, you did," said Cecily. "I saw, in the yellow parlor, in August. You thought I was in the garden, I saw." She looked up at her father. "You must not do it again." Alexander said hoarsely, "I will not do it again. Promise. I promise." "Say it to her," said Cecily. "Not to me." He looked over his daughter's head at his wife. Rosamund was standing very straight at the sideboard, with a teapot in her hand, and her eyes bright. "I promise you," said Alexander Vane. "Rosamund, I will not make you cry again." "You will," said Rosamund quietly, because she was an honest woman. Because that is what people who live in the same house do to each other, sometimes, without meaning to. "But you will not do it the way you have done it this year." "That I will accept that," he said. "I promise." Cecily seemed satisfied. She turned. She walked to Rosamund. She put her arms up. Rosamund set the teapot down and lifted her. She was a large woman, and Cecily was a small child, and lifting her was nothing. And Cecily put her arms around Rosamund's neck and said into her collar quite clearly, "Good morning, Mama Rosamund." It was not, "Good night, Mama." It was better. It was the name Cecily had chosen. Not the mother she had lost. Not a replacement for her. But a new thing. A name Cecily had made. Because Cecily had needed one, and the making of it had been done quietly, over months. Alexander sat down on the breakfast room floor, because his legs would not hold him. Theodore, from his father's arms, said with the ghost of a laugh, "Papa, you cannot sit on the floor." "I can," said Alexander, "and I am. It is undignified. It is very undignified. Come and sit on it with me." Theodore sat on the floor with him. Cecily, in Rosamund's arms, watched them. She said, "Mama Rosamund, may we?" "You may," said Rosamund gravely. if you are careful of the teapot. And she carried Cecily to the floor and sat down with them, all four of them in a row on the breakfast-room boards. And Mrs. Grimsby came in with the toast, and stopped in the doorway and did not say a word and went out again. Because Mrs. Grimsby had been a housekeeper for 31 years, and knew a moment when she saw one. There was, of course, still the aunt. Aunt Lavinia arrived at 11, having been informed by a footman that his Grace had returned, and she came into the drawing-room in full afternoon dress, at 3 hours before the hour for it, which was itself a declaration of war. She said, "Alexander, a word." "You may speak in front of my wife," said Alexander. "I would prefer." "You may speak in front of my wife," said Alexander again, "or you may not speak. My wife has been running this house for a year while I have been in London disgracing myself, and I have come home to find that she has done it better than I have ever done anything in my life. And she has done it while I did not open her letters, which is a shame I will carry Aunt Lavinia into my grave. Anything you have to say to me about her authority in this house, you will say in front of her, or you will not say." Aunt Lavinia's mouth thinned to a line. "She has opened the blue room," she said. "She has aired it," said Alexander. "She has aired it every day for 8 months, and last night I entered it for the first time since Charlotte died, and I entered it because Rosamond had made it possible for me to enter it. If you wish to make an accusation of my wife concerning the blue room, aunt, I would recommend that you make it precisely, because I will require precision. She has taken to teaching in the village school. She has. It is a great kindness to the village. Continue. She has spent. She has recovered," said Rosamond, from her chair by the window, in a voice that was polite and unshakable, £1,700 in misappropriated rents this year, madam. I have the ledger, if you would care to inspect it. I have also had the roof of the Fenmore cottage repaired at a cost of £4 12s, without authorization, because there was a woman confined there, and it was raining. If His Grace wishes to deduct £4 12s from my allowance, I will make no complaint. I do not, said Alexander, wish to deduct £4 12s from your allowance. I wish to double your allowance. I wish it doubled by tomorrow, Aunt Lavinia, said Alexander. She is not the sort of woman who— She is not, said Alexander, the sort of woman one finds in a London drawing-room. No, she is not. She is a large, plain-spoken woman from a country parsonage, who was overlooked by every man in her county for 14 years, because they were all fools. And she is the finest human being it has ever been my privilege to know, and she is my wife, and she is the Duchess of Harrowmere. And she will be treated in this house as such. And if you find this arrangement disagreeable, Aunt Lavinia, the dower house at Harrowmere Cross is very comfortable, and I will have it made ready for you by Friday. There was a silence. Aunt Lavinia looked at Rosamond. Rosamond looked back at her, without triumph, without warmth, with the same steady watchfulness with which she had heard the village of Marwood call her too large to marry for 14 years. I see, said Aunt Lavinia at last. I hope you do, said Alexander. I shall consider the dower house. Consider it by Friday. She went out. Rosamond waited until the door had closed. Then she said, quite mildly, You did not need to offer her the dower house. She would have submitted with less. I know, he said, I did not do it for her submission. I did it for you. I did not need it either. I know, he said, and the B. I did it because I have owed it to you for 11 months. And I have only just discovered the currency. She smiled, then a full, unguarded smile, the first he had ever seen from her. And it stopped him in the middle of the room, because he had not, until that moment, understood that she had been guarding it. Winter came in slowly at Harrowmere that year. The snow was late. It did not fall until the second week of December, and when it fell, It fell softly, in the way of snow that does not intend to be a nuisance. The fires were kept up in every room. Cecily learned 3 new hymns and 1 bawdy sailor's song she was not supposed to know, and had learned from a stable boy, and she sang all 4 of them impartially, in a small, clear voice that was gaining strength. Theodore began to laugh again, at first cautiously, and then by January without noticing that he was doing it. The blue room was open for the season. Rosamond did not move Charlotte's things. She placed on the pianoforte a small vase of winter greenery, and she placed beside it a framed miniature of the 2 children Charlotte had not lived to see grown, so that the room became not a shrine, but a place a mother might have kept, which was a different kind of remembering. Alexander sat in the chair by the window sometimes, in the afternoons, and read. Sometimes Cecily came in and sat on the floor beside him. Sometimes she did not. She was not pressed. The trustees, informed of the recovery of £1,700 and of the Duchess's stewardship of the estate, wrote a letter of the most measured congratulation. They also quietly dropped the noises they had been making about the guardianship of the children. And, cor. Praise, Taston. Aunt Lavinia moved to the Dower House on the Wednesday, and once she was there, discovered that she liked it very much, and became, over the course of the winter, cautiously fond of the new Duchess, who wrote her every Tuesday, whether Aunt Lavinia answered or not. Rosamond had, by then, some experience of writing letters to people who did not answer, and knew that the practice was, in the long run, its own reward. Alexander did not go to London until March. When he did, he took his wife, and he took his son, and he took his daughter, and he took, to the horror of every hostess who received them, a governess and a nurse, and a great many trunks, and no aunt at all. He was seen, at 3 balls that spring, to dance twice in the evening, once with his wife, and once with his wife again, because he did not care to dance with anyone else. He was seen to escort his wife into supper, past 4 unmarried duchesses of higher precedence. He was seen, at Lady Whitlock's, to say to a woman who had made an audible remark about his wife's size, "Madam, cruelty seems already abundant this evening. I see no reason to add mine. Excuse me," and to walk past her without another word. The remark, told and retold in 3 drawing-rooms by nightfall, did more for the new Duchess of Harrowmere than any amount of introduction. The tongue, as Alexander had said, chewed jokes. But it swallowed facts, and the fact of Rosamond Vane, steady, plain-spoken, unmoved, running an estate that had been failing, and raising 2 children who had been lost, became, over the course of that season. She was not the fashion. She would never be the fashion. But she was a fact, and facts, in the long ledger of the world, outlast fashions. They came home in June. Cecily ran into the drive ahead of the carriage, though she had been told not to, and she flung herself at Mrs. Grimsby, whom she had missed, and told her, in a rush of 6-year-old confidences, everything that had happened in London, which was mostly, in Cecily's telling, about horses. Theodore Tan now walked more sedately, and shook hands with the steward, and inquired after the tenants like a small man of business. Alexander helped Rosamond out of the carriage. He put her hand through his arm. They walked up the drive together. She had, on the first morning she had come to Harrowmere Hall, walked up this drive alone, because he had gone ahead into the house without offering her his arm. She had noted it that morning, and had trained the note not to land visibly. It had, of course, landed anyway. Some things do. She said as they walked. "The roses have come." "They have," he said. "Mrs. Grimsby told me that Charlotte had wanted roses along this walk, and had never had the time, I thought." She paused. "I thought she should have had them." He stopped in the drive. He turned to her. "Rosamond, he said. That. You are the woman who stayed. I nearly did not, I know. But you did. I stayed, she said. Because I loved them and because in the end I loved you, though I had promised myself I would not. You should not have had to promise yourself that no, she said, but I did, and I broke the promise, and I am glad I did. He kissed her. Then, in the drive, in full view of the house, and Mrs. Grimsby, and both the children and 3 gardeners and the second footman. It was not their first kiss that had happened. Quietly. In the library on a night in November when he had at last been able to say what he meant. But it was the first she had been kissed by him in daylight, in front of the world, without concealment. And she understood, as he held her, that she was being claimed publicly by the man who had married her in shame and had come home to marry her again, in truth. Cecily from the front step shouted, "Papa, you are being undignified again." "I am," called Alexander, without looking away from his wife. "Good," said Cecily. Rosamond began to laugh. She did not stop for some time. That evening she went, as she had gone every evening for over a year, to the west corridor. And she drew the curtains of the blue room, and she stood for a moment in the last of the light, and she did not weep, because there was no longer anything left to weep for in that room. The grief in it had been aired patiently, day by day, until it had become memory instead of wound. She closed the door softly. She went along the corridor to her own room, which was now also his, and which had on the writing desk by the window a small stack of 41 letters, tied with a plain ribbon, which he had asked her permission to keep, and which she had granted on the condition that they never again be read by him without her in the room. He was, when she came in, sitting on the bed with his coat off and one boot on. He looked up. "I was thinking," he said, "of that first morning in the parlor at Marwood, when you asked me what had failed in me that I could not go home. Yes, I have an answer now. I did not have one then. Tell me, what had failed in me was that I had been taught by a cold father and a warm wife that there were only 2 kinds of feeling, and that the first was safe and the second was fatal. And when the second one nearly killed me, I decided to be my father, because my father had survived whatever else he had done. I did not know that there was a third kind. And what is the third kind?" He looked at her. He said, "The third kind is patient. It writes letters for a year and does not stop. It goes into a room a man cannot enter, and airs it. It teaches a child to say her own name. It runs a house. It is not fatal and clade. It only asks, in the end, to be seen." She sat down beside him. She put her head against his shoulder. She was a large woman, and he was a tall man, and it fit. And she said, "Yes, Rosamond." "Yes, I see you. I know," she said. "I have known since November. I only needed you to say it in daylight." Outside, in the drive, one of the gardeners was calling to another about the roses. Above them, in the nursery, Cecily was singing a hymn her mother had taught her, and which she now sang without weeping, because grief that has been sung is no longer a poison. Down the corridor, Theodore was reading a book that was too old for him and would not admit it. Somewhere in the Dower house, Aunt L